Good to see you.
Nice to
Thanks
see
for
you
making
too.
time.
Hi.
Um, so I thought it would be fantastic to have this conversation around physical activity promotion in Africa, and you two obviously came to mind from the team, and I thought it would be very interesting because we have someone who does a lot of work around physical activity training and programs, and on the other hand, someone else who's doing work around like regional level work for physical activity, and what happens if we bring these two people into conversation. So I thought that we'll actually start off by just doing a quick introduction of two of you, and then I had some questions, and then we'll just see where the conversation goes. Awesome. So, Sheron Sultan's roots are in South Africa, Mozambique, and her heart is in Sydney, Australia. She wants to create a community for school kids and women from all walks of life and empower them with the knowledge, support, and resources to improve their well-being and confidence in a compassionate and fun environment. This includes guided fitness programs, tailored nutritional education through her personal training brand, and more recently through Afro Step, a new full body workout combining African moves, strength, and cardio with a cultural angle and fun. And hi, Sheron. Nice to have you.
Hello,
Yeah,
thank you.
festival. And Binta Sako is the World Health Organization Technical Officer for the reduction of non-communicable disease risk factors with a focus on promoting physical activity. She supports countries in the African region in developing strategies, policies, and increasing research capacity and dissemination. She has a background in pharmacy and has developed expertise on public health and nutrition. She's passionate about creating healthy environments and making healthy choices the easiest choices. She has lived and worked on over 15 countries in Africa, Europe, and North America. Hi, Binta. Good to have you.
Hi. Hi, nice being here.
Awesome. So this is the EAF Festival, and we welcome everyone. We encourage you to tweet anything about our panelists that catches your mind, send questions. The hashtag is hashtag EAF Festival. And my name is Ebele Mogo. So my first question goes to, I think I'd spoken earlier about why I chose you two. I think it's going to be very interesting to just see where it's going to give us a very dynamic conversation on this question of innovative ways and culturally appropriate ways to promote physical activity for Africans. So I thought I will first of all start with Binta. So Binta, I've been thinking, if someone were to ask you, so there's so many pressing health concerns in Africa, and why does physical activity matter, especially right now? What would you say?
Hmm. Well, why does it matter? I would say it's because we are quite active in Africa if we look at the general population, but it's changing so fast that we have to make sure that we retain our advantage. And that's why it's important now to keep that promotion of physical activity in all its senses, because in Africa, we see physical activity as sports. When we talk about physical activity, people think sports, whereas it's everyday life. And in that everyday life, we are changing our habits very quickly without anybody realizing that there are shifts. So when you speak to most Africans, they'll say, we don't have a problem with physical activity. We're good. We don't need any work there. So it's not a priority in many of our countries, but I strongly believe that it should be, because it's an area where we do have an advantage that we have to maintain.
Got it. Thank you, Binta. And you said something about it. People often thinking it's necessarily just sports, but it's more about kind of your whole life in a sense. So that leads me to the question I actually wanted to ask Sheron. How what does it mean? What is culturally appropriate physical activity? What does it mean to sort of integrate physical activity into our lives? What does that look like for you?
So I'll tell you something before I answer that. When I moved to Australia, I was interested in sports, similar to what Binta was saying, that we think being active requires you to play sports, right? Which is not really the case. It's your everyday movement. So when I moved to Australia and I wanted to get into sports, netball, athletics, but because of the color of my skin, a lot of kids thought that I should be number one, regardless, because that's how they viewed Black people, that you're not really going to be great in maths or anything, but in sports, which triggered a lot of things for me, because obviously when you grew up in South Africa during apartheid, you experience a lot of segregation, right? But when I moved to Australia, it changed a little bit, which fast forward to where I am right now, that's when I got into what I'm doing as a personal trainer. And what I found was when I get inquiries from African women, the first thing they would say to me is, if I lift weights, am I going to go bulky? If I lift weights, do you think it will be okay for me to still give birth? So there was a lack of education culturally to say, even as a woman, it's okay to lift weights. It's not going to stand in your way in starting a family, but instead it's going to build you stronger, which is going to be good for your mental health, which is going to help prevent certain illnesses or reduce diabetes or even hypertension. So there's quite a few things that you could actually use physical activities to help you, not only to look good, but to also feel good. So when you educate the young ones or even the adults regarding fitness and culture, and explain even about our ancestors, that they used to walk miles and miles to get food for their family, and that was still part of exercising. So when you bring that into context, they then understand that being fit and being healthy doesn't only require you to look good, it's actually good for your mental state, and which is so much relevant to what we're going through today with, you know, the pandemic. So getting that 10 minutes a day walk or for a run, whatever is suitable for you at the time is very much beneficial than doing absolutely nothing. Yes.
Awesome. Thank you. And you said something about how, like, you know, our ancestors moved a lot, like just kind of this whole idea that it's not really something that's foreign to us, you know. So that's really interesting. And I mean, the part where you said that they just assume that you're going to be the first is quite annoying. But
what Sheron said is really interesting. It's really interesting. I just wanted to make a point that, you know, when you say, you know, our ancestors did it, all ancestors, I think, from all over the world did it before. But in Africa today, if you walk, it's seen as being poor. So what ancestors did is actually associated with hardship. We don't value it. You know, in the 80s or the 70s, in Burkina Faso, where I live, people used to have bikes. It was the land of bicycles, and everybody would cycle. But today, they all want motorcycles, because having a bicycle is seen, oh, you're sweating, you're in hardship. So sweating, unless it's in a gym,
then it's like
not
sexy.
very fancy. So I think culturally, we have that in Africa. There's what's seen as uplifting socially, and is seen as, you know, socially taking you down. And everyone wants the social ascension, right? So I think that's something we have to look into when we have programs for physical activity. And with you know, the pandemic and everybody being online, we've had a lot of programs now online, but it's true that we're becoming more and more of a digitalized continent, but still limited to a minority in our region. So we have to be mindful of that equity in innovation. And I know this is the theme a bit of it's that innovation. We have to make sure that all our, you know, sectors in socioeconomic stratus benefit from it. And that's the challenge, really, to keep it equitable.
You said something about, I think, even both your conversations, there's a big thing that comes up, which is perceptions of physical activity. Perception that as a Black person, you're going to be very strong, or perception as an African woman, maybe this isn't really for me. Or if it's very true, like if someone sees you walking, they might be like, is there a problem? Like, did something happen? You know?
It's a real thing. It's damaging, I have to say, though, because one of the things that prompt me to doing what I do is to educate the young generation here in Australia, especially African kids, because you can lose your identity very quick. And if you don't have the support at home, there goes your life. You know what I mean? Because you're trying to fit in this society and you're already labeled to be something that you're not, just because of the color of your skin. So even your goals of becoming a doctor one day can go, sabotaged, because the way we're viewed at times is not something amazing as becoming a counselor or becoming a psychiatrist. It's always had to do with some activity. It's a stereotype. So that's why it's important to educate the young ones, because they are the future. You know what I mean? So fitness, not only it makes you fit, but it builds confidence. It allows you to be creative as well. These days, you don't need to go for a run anymore. You can do exciting things, like, for example, the brand that I created, African music, while doing step class. Guess what? Even if you're an African kid who grew up in a family where they did not teach you about your own culture, you just got to learn it from someone else, the music, the language. I'm from South Africa. I teach young kids how to say Gunjani, means hello, dumelang, it's Sutu. I would use some Swahili words. I would try and get some different languages, just to sort of insert it into their minds that it's okay to be where you're from. You got to hold it, you got to earn it, you got to embrace it, and don't let anyone stand in your way. You can be anything, but remember to stay active, because that's going to build you to be confident as well. So education, small education for them, it can go a long way when it comes to fitness.
Education to build sports, to build, or fitness and physical activity to build confidence. And what you say actually resonates, because we know more and more the health benefits and mental health benefits of physical activity. And in the past, it used to be, fit, you had fitness or you had brains. And now we know that fitness can actually build your brains. And knowledge that people don't have. I remember at some point my kids were in school, they were in an exam class, and the mothers were saying, oh, no sports this year.
Because they have to focus.
For school, he has to concentrate on school. And I said, he actually needs the sports to keep him motivated and to give some oxygen to his brain. We don't realize that, but by educating people, by doing more research and showing these connections, then we know it's not just having fun. It actually has an impact. It has an impact on your neurotransmitters. It's science. It's not just jump around
It's very interesting.
And educating on that is really important. So good job doing, Sheron.
Yeah, it's really cool to hear about that. And it's so interesting because, again, you're really integrating into mental health, even in a sense, your sense of confidence, the way you're integrated in society in a more empowering way. Like, these are the things. And I think that this is probably the way, whole of person, even when, like, some of the research I do around physical activity and talking to different people, they would say, like, what, I remember we interviewed someone in Nigeria, in Lagos, and he was saying that I was cycling and it helped me to meet people, during this pandemic. People would say, like, I went for walks and it was good for you. You find that physical activity is integrated into who people are. It's like this whole of person, and it's not necessarily just this isolated sports thing, So it's very interesting. Binta, I had a question for you. So we've talked a lot about like this perception. On the one hand, like Africans are very active, have always been very active. But on the other hand, we're transitioning in a way. Our aspirations are changing. People are more urban, car-centric culture. I wanted to touch on that aspect of like, I guess, the supports, like neighborhood supports or infrastructural supports. And I wanted to have a sense of what are you finding that works, or what kind of work is WHO doing around like ensuring this kind of, promoting this kind of whole of person physical activity, but with an emphasis on what you said about making the healthy choice the easy choice?
Yeah, this is, I must say, a new trend in WHO. And, in 2018, there was this new global action plan on physical activity that really looked at it in a very holistic way, where we realized more and more, and even with the other risk factors, that, the environment shapes what you do and who you are ultimately. So this is how this new action plan took into account the environment and how we shape not only policies, but also infrastructure. And this is where the conversation about walking and cycling, to make it easier for people to actually have that just everyday physical activity that has nothing to do with the amount you can pay for the gym subscription or anything like that. So this is a new conversation, and it's going to grow with partnerships. It's going to grow with innovative ways of doing business, not only for WHO, but other organizations. UNEP, the United Nations Environment Program, is also working on issues such as these. So working holistically, intersectorally is what's going to really move the agenda forward, because it's not only about physical activity at the end of the day, it's going to be about everything. We shape our environment physically with policies. So, and we need to have really much stronger partnerships to make it happen.
And what kind of partnerships are there any ones that are emerging? Are there any, for example, things that are going on the continent that you say like, this is very innovative in terms of how people are trying to integrate physical activity into, I guess, development and into society and infrastructure and all of that?
Yeah, it really varies from country to country. The partners will be different. Like I said, it's a new conversation. Not new from a few years, but it will take time to really materialize. But we do have examples from countries like Cabo Verde, Botswana. We have examples even in Senegal, in West Africa, where some groups are uniting to create, at a small scale for now, easy access to these kind of commodities for the public. Thinking of, okay, let's make sure that we have sidewalks. Ethiopia is working on some infrastructure for cycling. The same in Ghana. So it's still at a small scale, and we have to see what works and refine the system to make it at a larger scale. So I think this is what's going to develop more and more. For now, we don't have a country, one country that has done it all. It's really, bits here, bits there in terms of infrastructure, at least, because it's huge. It's a huge shift in the way we build our.
Yes.
Lagos, you're from Nigeria, right? It's like these cities are so big. So to come and redesign will take a lot. Infrastructure doesn't just, pop up. So I think we're going to see the changes if we push for it to start seeing the changes very soon.
Yes. And hopefully this conversation can be part of that, that extra push. I think we all need to, it's almost like a reorientation,
Yeah, but the push comes from civil society. If people ask for roads because they're thinking of their cars, well, that's what we're focus on. That's what the politicians and everybody's going to focus on. But if we think, I want a cycling lane in my community, I want to limit speed, all these things come together and say, well, let's build our cycle paths or make sure that we have sidewalks for people to walk, because that's what they're demanding. So it has to be a grassroots approach. And we're just here as, bigger organizations to support.
Got it. Thank you. So now thinking about, we said something around kind of the role of, especially with COVID-19, people going online a lot. Sheron, I'd love to hear from you about if you're seeing any changes in sort of any innovative ways that people are engaging with physical activity now in this COVID-19 era. I know it's stopped people from moving around, but I think people are also finding ways around it. And these are some interesting examples, perhaps, of what's possible. So I'd love to hear how you're seeing it from that perspective of someone who, promotes physical activity.
Okay. So, for example, with my program and, of course, the gym that I work for, one of the things that I've learned actually last year, because obviously last year when the pandemic started, we didn't know what's going to happen. So most personal trainers, anyone in the fitness industry, we had to think very quick. So for those that did not, unfortunately, some people did not have the vision of what they were going to do, being personal trainers, and then all of a sudden that's no longer there. So we had to think very quick. What are we going to do online? We've never done online before. So we had to use Zoom. Fortunately, Zoom has been going on for many years, especially if you worked in an office. That was already implemented. So I had a bit of understanding how to use Zoom. And what I had to do was I had to convince my clients to do Zoom sessions to keep them on check, not only because for their physical progress, but for their mental health. Because when COVID hit everyone, we were all stressed. We didn't know what was going to happen. The fear of the unknown. So you get yourself going to a bottle shop to buy wine, to buy alcohol, to indulge in junk food, whereas I found that was the most challenging part for myself in encouraging people not to really lean so much on that to take away the stress, but to lean more onto fitness. Fortunately, we were able to go for walks. You were still allowed to go out and go for a walk around your neighborhood. So part of the program that I used to do for my clients as a personal trainer, it would allow them to leave home for at least 20 minutes, go for a quick walk around the block. If you, depending on the level of fitness that you're in, if you are maybe say a beginners, I'd say go for a 10 minutes walk. Tomorrow I'll see you on Zoom. And part of the sessions that I used to do was every week I would have a Zoom catch up called Let's Talk. So that was for mainly like a chat, just to find out how everyone is going and share ideas as well with every one of us. Because myself as well, being a personal trainer, I needed their support. You know what I mean? So the support was needed for everybody. So every week we would meet just for a chat for 30 minutes and address our issues and address what we're going through. And by that, I did see some progress from a lot of people, because they were able to say to me, you know what, I've always had things that I wanted to share with people, but I just didn't know how to voice it out. By having Zoom and actually going through this whole pandemic situation, I was able to actually let go of my insecurities, because I realized that other people were going through the same problems as I am. So not only did I see people get fitter during COVID because they had nothing else to do other than exercise, I found that their mental health as well improved. Where I thought that was amazing. We thought, whoa, how are we going to exercise online? How does that work? But over time, you kind of have a little diagram where you see the changes in everyone. And now we're on lockdown number 2, obviously a year later. Now we're back on lockdown. And guess what? We all know what to do. Easy, come on Zoom. Let's do online classes. I do African music. Let's dance. You can't go to clubs. You can't go to a party. Why not dance at home? I'll play some latest Afro beats. I'll teach you how to do dombolo. I'll teach you how to do some cool moves while you lose body fat. And not only that, it's uplifting as well. So that's what's been happening. And so far, so good.
Mm.
Yeah.
Because I'm personally thinking of like here, even when the first lockdown, I remember just how uncertain everything was. And I think everyone was in shock. In a way, it seemed like, at least on my end of things, I felt like, oh wow, this is really becoming a big thing. And then it's like lockdown, and then it was weird. It felt quite claustrophobic. And then you're now thinking, and then people stay like getting into like baking. And then people would say, well, I'm baking, I'm learning languages, I'm doing this and that and all of that. And personally for me, I found like something that was very helpful was just going to a park. I think I discovered a park during that time and just going and just walking around. And you're still a bit afraid of seeing people up close, but it's nice to at least see them and know that there's people in the world.
Yeah. And how great did you feel going for that walk? You felt so great.
Yeah.
You appreciate the air as well. You're thinking, wow. Every morning I'd wake up and I'm like, yeah, it's a new day. Until you were in lockdown, you realize that nature is part of us. We're humans. We're created to move. You know, so I don't understand when people don't move. Not, of course, by choice. That's alarming. I'm thinking, really? There are people out there that would kill to go for a run, you know, because we're created to move. That's how humans are created, not to sit around, you know. So, but obviously it is challenging when you have to do it online. But you have to be creative, because it can get boring over time doing the same thing over and over. But thankfully these days, technology, you can find all sort of exercising programs online that are very interesting. One day you could be doing yoga, one day you can be doing Pilates, one day you can be doing, I don't know, like dancing, you know. So there's no excuse. No excuse.
There's something that has incidentally happened where like there's the question of access, you know, it's now a bit more convenient, and it makes me think about also the question of inclusion, you know, people that are often sometimes left out of the conversation on physical activity, people with disabilities. There's also like, especially in Africa, sometimes when it's found that girls tend to work out more, maybe more in this like whole of life way, or in their neighborhoods. And once it's all just like equipment, whatnot, they might not feel included. Older people, some extent cultural perceptions around women. Binta, I wonder if you could touch on a bit more. I wanted us to continue this conversation on kind of access to physical activity. And there's some things we're saying here, which is like, yes, on the one hand, digital tools might exclude certain people, but it can make it a bit more convenient. Nature might be something that makes people have access to physical activity. I'd love to hear just what, I guess, maybe some of your thoughts around this whole question of access and inclusion as it relates to physical activity opportunities.
I think you've touched on for me, very important point. And that's what I was calling inequity, or at least searching for equity, that everybody has some sort of access. And it is difficult in the region. You mentioned disability. It's not mainstream. Even in our health system, it's not yet mainstream, let alone in the whole of society. People with mental illnesses or mental deficiencies are usually totally absent of the social scene. They're hidden, let alone go and do physical activity. The elderly, then we have elderly and women. It's cultural barriers where it's not seen as necessarily desirable to look like somebody who does a lot of sports. A little bit of muscle mass, it's negative because you look like a man, you know, those stereotypes. And for elderly people, it's not respectable to be active or to dress in a certain way. And I don't know if I think I mentioned this to you, Ebele, in one of our conversations, where on Facebook, this girl of a certain age, I mean, only in her 40s, 50s, was wearing fitness and walking. And the comment she got was, you're too old to dress like that and to do that.
Yeah, I think
it's absolutely amazing that so these shifts will come, but work on them. We have to work on the image of what physical activity brings. Having being of a certain figure has to be worked on. That image has to be worked on. So it is a big issue, I think, that in the region that sabotages the promotion of physical activity, definitely. But it is changing, and I think we have to look at the positive. It's going to be a challenge, but I think we're already shifting. We're already shifting in that sense because people are, NCDs and diabetes, heart strokes are increasing. Everybody has in their family somebody who has had stroke, and women also are affected. And now they're being told, well, you have to walk. You have to, you have to be active. So it's coming. And as you said, do we have spaces? Do we have the parks? Not yet. But as we move on, I really do believe that these the setting will change because people will have a demand for them.
Thank you, Binta. And as you were talking, I was just thinking about the intersections. I think with even the conversation on climate change in Africa, a lot of these things we're saying around parks, and I'm just thinking about that opportunity to intersect some of these questions, like we're all having this conversation on how do we want to develop? We want to develop in a way that people can improve their health in a way that's good for the environment. And I think that there's a bit more push for that. I hope conversation.
Yeah, no, there definitely is. In all our policies at WHO, we have that component. It's really what we're going towards. It is difficult because we don't speak the same language in code. So we have to first. We know the bridges. If you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, and physical activity, we know, touches on so many of them. It's not only on health, like you just said, environment, peace. There are about 6, 7, 8 SDGs that physical activity alone touches on. And it's the same for all the other risk factors. All the maternal health also touches on all those different. So we know these interconnections. It's about making them happen, because when you have a lot of people in the same conversation, it becomes a bit difficult, even though we do agree that we have to work together. If you're many, it becomes more difficult if you're alone in terms of going fast. But in terms of how far you can go, it definitely will have more impact when we start working together. So I do believe, and I trust that this is just work in progress.
Got it. What did I even want to say? Yeah, I think I was gonna have, what was I gonna ask? So talking about this, yes, I remember. Talking about it's so interesting because I think we've been talking a lot about like how do we put physical activity into the whole of society? How do we put physical activity into the whole of person kind of thing? And to do that, sort of these perceptions and infrastructure, and how do we put physical activity on the table when people are saying like, oh, people are poor or something, and you're like, no, this actually matters, And the interesting thing is like, we don't even have enough money to treat people of chronic disease. So why don't we invest in something that's much more cost effective and very impactful and has so many intersections with society? So Sheron, I'm going to come to you because I know that you talk a lot about in fact, you talk about fun, right? And I want to know like more about this idea of fun. It's like you're framing this conversation on physical activity in a different way, in a way that someone might be like, oh yeah, like, you know, this is something I want to do. And I just want to hear more, maybe what kind of attitudinal changes have you seen, and just what inspired this idea of fun, and I just want to riff of that some more.
Okay. So growing up in South Africa, I grew up in the countryside of in Nelspruit in Mpumalanga, where it's very known for its agriculture. I grew up with my grandmother. She pretty much raised me. Well, we all are raised by our grandmothers, isn't it? While our mothers are working and getting their, qualifications so they can have a better job. So I always used to watch my grandmother in her backyard, always planting corn and all those delicious organic goods. Back then, I used to think it was boring. I thought, what is she doing? 4 o'clock in the morning. Why do I have to wake up at 5 and clean the house? When you're young, you don't realize that you're getting trained to understand how your body moves and what you should eat, which is good for your health. So growing up, of course, played sports. It was fun purely because it was competitive, because you want to win. So when you win, you're like, yeah, it's fun. But then the thrill is gone. Moving to Australia, and when I started Afro Step, I started it because I used to work in an office and I used to get bullied by my manager because of how I looked. So, which triggered many parts of me when I moved to Australia, where kids used to be very confused of my looks. They used to say, why do you have hair like this? Are you from Africa? You should have lions in your backyard. You should be a singer. You should be this, that, that. So they pretty much painted my life for me, which some of the things I didn't even know how to do. I never knew how to sing. But for some reason, I had to perform at a concert because I wanted to please them. So do you see what I'm coming from? Like, I felt like my life was painted at a very young age for me, which I didn't even know some of the things. I was like, okay, Mom, I have to be a singer now. Can you play for my singing lessons? Okay. And so when I worked in an office, all of that got triggered. It reminded me when I was a teenager, how I lost my identity. And during my teenagehood, I was very unhappy. So I thought, what is it that I want to do with my life that's fun? Everywhere I went to do some volunteering work, I used to go into youth centers and talk to young kids, self-development, and they always used to look very depressed and unhappy. And I thought, life is about fun. What's going on? I'm not understanding this. So eventually, when I launched Afro Step, it was purely to educate not just African kids, but everyone about African culture through music and dance. And obviously what we do back home, when you turn on music, what do we all do? We dance, right? We have fun. So I did a lot of research on dance fitness classes, and I thought, you know what? African music is uplifting. I want my program to be fun. I want someone to wake up in the morning and not look at that alarm clock and say, oh gosh, I'm going to train. I want him to look at that alarm and say, I'm ready to Afro Step today, because I know it's going to be fun. Because when I do my program, 45 minutes, we're dancing, we're exercising. I throw in some cool words, Zulu words, things that they don't know. And it turned out to be something very fun and educational. So not only do my clients learn African dance move, they also learn a bit of African culture, which to me brings joy. Because guess what? Next time they speak to someone else, they're able to correct people when they laugh at African kids or any other nationality, for all that matters. So when I designed Afro Step, I wanted it to be a place where women can come and feel free while burning calories. And I've seen an amazing progress since I've launched it last year. I launched Afro Step last year, when just right before the pandemic. And during that whole time to where I am today, all my returning clients have raved so much about it that I've lost so much body fat, and the fun that I've had, I've got rhythm. I go home and I shake my hips. I go home and I want to listen to African music because it brings joy. Miriam Makeba, Pata Pata. I have so many women that are always messaging me, can you send me that tune? Can you send me that music? I want to dance. I want to do Afro step at home. And I'm thinking, I just started this as a joke, by the way. So not only do you get fit, you also have fun. You know, people look forward to coming to my classes, and that for me brings a lot of joy. So that's what I mean when I say fun, because you get to do so many things within that 45 minutes. You get to dance, you get to exercise, and you get to learn a few different words in Zulu or any other languages that I pick on the day, depending on how I'm feeling.
That's really awesome. And it's great to see how you were able to take something that was, that was wounding and transform it into something that's empowering for you and for other people as well.
Yes.
That's really awesome.
And you know what? I have to say, though, that even when I go into schools, because I go into schools as well, and I teach kids about, culture, how to break stereotype, not just for African kids, but for every nationality. Because once your parents are from a different country, although you're living in Australia, you're still considered as a minority. And it's going back to the perception. People look at you and they think you're from this country, that we're going to treat you slightly different. So AfroStep will go into a school and help those kids to break those stereotypes through music and dance. So it allows them to step out of their comfort zone and learn a different culture. By the end of the program, when you ask them, what did you learn? I learned that in Africa, there's 54 countries. I learned that in South Africa, that's where the big 5 is, the Lion King, Nelson Mandela, beautiful colors and so forth, things that they did not know, which automatically breaks the stereotype for young African kids as well. Because if you ask a kid in a school, when I say Africa, what comes to mind? Dirty water, poor people. You understand? So I don't blame the kids. It's because they lack education. So when you feed them a little bit of it, then they're hungry for more. And the kids, even some of the African kids, will say to me, thank you so much for showing me that I can be something like you one day. I can embrace my culture. I can go home and I can say to my mother, I want to be a lawyer, but I want to also participate in some sort of sports outside of school. I want to go to the gym. I want to look fit, Mom. It's that whole stereotype as well from our, parents back in Africa. They sometimes the education between exercising can be something that's taboo, that a female shouldn't exercise because your job is to stay at home, look after your husband, and have a family. The whole concept of going out and lifting weights, it's not seen as a women's thing to do. This is a survey that I did, and I spoke to quite a few African women, and they told me the same thing. My mom doesn't want me to exercise because she thinks that I'm gonna be like a man. I'm gonna look like a man. I won't be able to produce babies. So that lack of education again prevents them from being active.
Yeah.
And it is a big issue. It is a big issue here in Australia for the African community, because some of the kids, they don't have that education, or they've got the access, everything's there. They can go out for a walk, they've got personal trainers, but the lack of education from parents sometimes can be lacking. Yeah,
it's true, because when I do, sometimes it makes me upset, because when I do see parks, like I don't know how it is, but in Nigeria, I grew up in Lagos technically, but my parents are originally from Eastern Nigeria, Anambra, which is where you're from, technically your state of origin. And driving through, I'm always fascinated, like there's these parks, or not necessarily parks, fields anyways, where people play. But then I'm like, these parks exist and it's just mostly boys playing in these parks, like most of them playing football. And I'm just wondering, like, how are we going to make it such that girls will also have spaces to play in this park, or girls will know that they can be involved. This football is not just a guy thing where you just sit back and watch, but like, it's open to you. But I want to connect this also to something that you said, because when you're talking about like this Afro step as a way of empowering people, connecting to culture, changing stereotypes, it makes me think of this long line of almost tradition of, and among Black people, really, among Africans, the people of African descent, like moving as sort of empowerment or liberation. So like you have I know that there's a program I heard of recently. It's where is it? I think it's in the US, and it's Girl Trek, and it takes like Black girls and they walk together and they listen to like they listen to music from sort of some of this the civil rights movement. They connect to culture, their history. It's empowering, and it's a way to just like it's a way to move, but then it's also a way to connect to your history and to your sense of empowerment and liberation in a sense. And Binta, you're in Burkina Faso, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I remember reading that like one of the things that Thomas Sankara did in his time was like encourage people to be active. And like I was just like, wow, like it was so I was so impressed. Like people, I think there was even a day or something where
there still is.
Mm.
There still is the day for sports. Here have this, there's a big, I would call it park, in the middle of the city. Where you can go hike, run. And in terms of the way they organize the city, let's say a certain zone, there was always a place that was reserved to have, it could be a garden, but for like the neighborhood, there would be a space. Unfortunately, these places are not maintained. So they exist, but people don't go because it's not pretty, it's not safe always. So I think, yes, definitely there was a progressive political orientation in that time. And these things are still here. They're still here. And I think a lot of countries, we do have places that were reserved for parks, but because of the lacking, financial lacking, they're not maintained. And that's something that can change. Can change, yeah.
Yeah. So there's also that question of sustaining some of the progress that we're making through like political different changes politically. I also, part of my childhood was spent in this town called Festac, and it was actually the festival. It was like shortly after a lot of African countries gained independence. They came up with this like festival of Black arts and culture, and it was in Lagos. So they kind of designed a town for this festival. And this town was very well planned. So they actually had places demarcated for sports. It's one of the few places in Lagos that has sidewalks and everything, but they have not been maintained very well. So I remember like in school, we did used to go to some of those places to exercise, but sometimes when you're walking home, people will say, you know what, that area, they had these guys like they call like obtainers, they can like take your pocket money. So you have to like be careful. You know, it wasn't really a place, especially as a girl, that you just feel safe to just go alone by yourself. So there's also that question of maintenance. So I have a few last questions for you too. And as we kind of come to the end, I'm just thinking of the threads that we've pulled in this conversation. You know, we've talked a lot about some of these perceptions of physical activity. We've talked about the potential for this change. I guess this change to in COVID, this is sort of a transition period, the potential to maybe use digital tools, the concern for also inclusion, the concern for equity in access to things like nature, infrastructure, digital tools that people use for engaging physical activity, connecting physical activity not just to sort of one thing that we do, but to the person, you know, their mental well-being, their confidence, their empowerment, their history, development, identity. We've talked about also like, okay, making sure that even when we do make this progress, like how do we sustain this progress? And the need to push and to continue to push so that physical activity is on the top of the agenda and people actually see the value from the individual level where it's like, a woman or anybody, really an African person, sees that, you know what, this physical activity is actually important for my child's education, their mental well-being. This will actually put me in a better place to have a baby, not stop me from having a baby. To the national level or the regional level, where we're saying that, you know what, this isn't something that comes later. This is very important, both in terms of reducing costs to the healthcare system, helping us in terms of climate change, creating other opportunities, you know, sports for development, even economic opportunities that can come from sports and exercise and all of that. So even workplaces, like maybe people won't be sick often if they are engaging in healthy lifestyles. It has been very, very, very rich. I think we've touched on so many different things. Now I have a question for both of you. So if you had, someone asked me this question in a recent conversation, so I want to throw it back to you. If you had, they gave me $500,000. I think I'm going to make this bigger. So let's make it $1 million. If you had $1 million, right? Sheron and Binta, and they gave you this money to kind of lay out this roadmap to achieve this, your wildest aspirations around using physical activity. What would you do? Where would you start? If there was no limits, what would you do? How would you go about it?
You want to start, Sheron?
You wanna get my ideas, Binta?
I can go for it. I mean, it's a blank check, right? There's no limit. You know?
You can go first, Binta.
Okay. Now you want my ideas. Let's make a deal. I start and you build on it so that we can get a bigger check.
There you go.
You see, that's where partnerships start.
There you go.
Yeah, let's start this partnership already. Okay.
You know, I would really start with infrastructure. Giving people the opportunity to have parks and to see what it feels like. And this is really specific to the continent, to the region, where I feel that if people are not promoting physical activity, it's because they don't have the full feel of what it brings to them. And if I would build parks, I would build playground for kids so that they especially in the urban poor areas, and make it beautiful. Sidewalks so that they can actually walk to school or cycle to school. I would start there because for me, everything then builds on the environment that you create. You see, my list wasn't too long, Ebele.
Oh.
Very focused. You're like 1 million, create all these parks in Africa and create all the sidewalks and infrastructure where people can engage in physical
comfortably
activity.
That they can engage comfortably in everyday physical activity. Everything for me will follow that.
Yeah. Got it. So now, Sheron, the partner.
Well, now that she's built all of those things, well, for me, really, one of the things that I actually want to do and working on is to start back where I come from, South Africa, and build not so much in all the areas, but my goal is to build like one big youth center where I grew up to give the access to the poor, because they don't have access to this new digital stuff that we have, you know, going back to having access to being able to exercise online or to learn about your culture. Because remember, just because you're from Africa, it doesn't mean you know much about your culture as well. So I'm all about culture. So I would want to build places where young kids and even families that are less fortunate to go in there and learn about health and fitness and why it's important. Here in Australia, one of my goals is to have my school programs in different schools, part of the curriculum. So that's something that I'm sort of working on at the moment. That's why I go into schools during the PE, which is the physical education, So ideally, I would love to see AfroStep as part of that in different schools, where not only they teach about African culture, but the importance of kids respecting other cultures, which will enable young kids to be who they are and stick to their true identity rather than feeling left out, which will encourage them to be fit and happy. So these are the two things that I'm very much head set for. So if I had that $1 million or million whatever blank check, I think I would focus on those two things
Awesome.
to help those that are less fortunate so they have access, because it doesn't help someone who goes to the doctors and they get told that you diabetic, you have to exercise, and they say, I don't have access, it's the pandemic, you're not allowed to leave the house. What do? You don't have a computer, you don't have a smartphone. What then? So I would want to, you can't help the whole world, but you could help one section and make sure that you make a huge change and a difference. Yeah,
thank you. So I think to wrap up this conversation, I think one thing we've come back to is this question of access. And I really do hope that as you both were talking, I thought about a project I saw in Ghana where they went to the market, and usually when women are in the market, their children are there with them. And sometimes they're little children just there. Maybe they're doing their homework or helping their parents, or they're really small. And we designed a part of the market where while these women are selling and all that, the children can be playing, so they can be active, they can be doing things, and I thought it was just really awesome. So this question of access that we're harping on, I think is so important and really a great way to end this conversation. I do hope that, yes, this is our blank check where we're going to have the infrastructure, the programs, and all of that would just be so wonderful. And I think that our conversation is it's a little but very important start to this question of like, how do we make physical activity accessible, inclusive, in innovative ways. So I just want to thank both of you for honoring this invitation to be here. I hope that it was interesting exchanging with one another from these different, but I think very complementary perspectives. And I think we'll continue to work towards this vision of improved physical activity and just improved health and well-being for Africans. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me, Ebele, and nice meeting you, Sheron. And I'll tune in to AfroStep to see what it's all about. Excellent.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, ladies, for having me too, for giving me the spotlight to share my vision. And it's great to see that there are people like us who want to make that little change, that 1% in this world, and inspire other people as well, because it's very hard. Life can be very challenging, but it's always about baby steps, isn't it? Absolutely. Any positive step is something. So thank you for putting this together. And
to everyone who's watching, follow the conversation. The hashtag is EAF Festival. And just keep going. Chat up Binta, chat up Sheron, and let's keep this conversation on being fit and being active and physically active for our well-being going. Thank you all.
Yeah, and every move counts.
Yeah.
Yes. Absolutely. I think that's something we've said. It's just moving, So yeah, awesome. Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.